Imagine this, you finished a killer grade, looks superb on your monitor, hits all the bells, contrast is there, color is the same. You send it off to your client and you get feedback that the contrast is off, the shadows are suppressed, and the highlights are blown out, and the overall skin tone sits on the green side. This is where we need to rely on using results video scopes and understand how to read the information displayed in them, as they reflect the unbiased intrinsic state of the image data. It's similar to trying to land an airplane in the fog by relying only on the instrument. In this episode, we'll go over 4 of the scopes and learn how to read and, most importantly, understand what's happening in your images. You can bring up one of the scopes in the color page by clicking on the Scopes button. Here you can have one of the scopes displayed at a time, but if you wish to have more than that, you can click the Expand button to have a separate, undocked and resizable window. In this case, you can have a single, dual, quad and 9 view mode for displaying multiple scopes at a time. The nice thing about this layout is that you can resize it to fit a secondary display you might have connected to your workstation. You can select several different measurement scale styles based on the end use of your final deliverables, such as a 10-bit scale or a nit value based scale for HDR exports. We will be working with the 10-bit scale, which is on by default. These scales are applied to the Waveform, RGB Parade and Histogram. For the Vectorscope, you have several scale style options from the default simplified layout, as well as 75 or 100% color target placements. You can opt to have the display qualifier focus on to identify the sampled pixels as you move around with the eyedropper in the viewer. This is helpful to evaluate at a glance the tonal and color state of a certain object in the scene, such as skin tone. The low pass filter gives you the option of a cleaner scope graph, filtering out the possible signal to noise ratio and offering more detail. The Waveform Monitor is perhaps the most used scope because you can read multiple image data information at a glance. The graph displays the luminance of a certain pixel in the vertical axis and the positioning on the horizontal one. For instance, in the RGB mode, the graph overlays the red, green and blue channels so you can see the alignment. This is helpful if you want to neutralize the shadows or highlights by adjusting the color wheels until you have the RGB graphs aligned together. The channels, graphs, positioning and height will reflect the ones displayed in the RGB Parade. You can adjust the brightness of the scale as well as of the graph trace. The Y mode shows the true Luma representation graph. If you click on Colorize, you can see how the colors from the viewer are mapped onto the graph. Preserving detail when adjusting the brightness and adding contrast is very important to the integrity of your image, so keep an eye out on the values to make sure that you're not blowing out your highlights by going over 1023 or crushing your shadows by hitting 0. You can also evaluate the contrast of an image by checking how tall or narrow the graph is. Similar to the waveform, the RGB Parade displays the same graph, but divided by the RGB channels side by side, so you can evaluate the strength of each channel individually. The RGB Parade is extremely helpful to quickly detect and eliminate color casts and imbalances by revealing which channel carries more strength. A balanced image will have relatively aligned RGB graphs in the highlights and shadow areas. And of course, a cooler looking image will tend to favor the blue channel. And that's not to say it's wrong. For certain biased looks, the RGB Parade channels will not be perfectly aligned. So you will need to think subjectively at that point, but if you are trying to correct a white balance for a natural look, then you will need a balanced parade. The Vactoscope is simply a scope to visualize the hue range and saturation of an image. It consists of a crosshair chart where the less saturated colors are displayed towards the center and the more saturated ones stretching towards the farther edge. The chart displays the 75% primary color targets positioned at their proper angle around the graph. This will help you read the color information and saturation of an image distributed across the Vectorscope map, for example a warm cast that's biased on the red quadrant. Likewise, a cool biased image will register away from the center and towards the blue quadrant. A balanced image will tend to have a centered trace that distributes evenly across the Vectorscope map. And as we mentioned before in dialing the correct skin tone episode, the Vectorscope has a helpful way of showing a skin tone reference line where you enable that in the scope settings. This is a helpful general guide to evaluate the average skin tone hue and discover if there's any color tint that might need to be corrected. And finally, the histogram, which you might be familiar with from photo editing applications like Lightroom. The histogram displays the pixel amount of red, green and blue channels spread across the image tonality and measured in either 10-bit scale values as we had on the Waveform and Parade, or in percentages, from 0 being black to 100 being white. And just with the RGB Parade, the histogram is great at evaluating image imbalances in the shadows, midtone and highlights areas that are plotted out in a horizontal chart. Well, learning how to read the scopes is vital when you're creating a natural look or a more color-biased, stylized mood. But as with everything in art, rules are meant to be broken, so experiment with some looks that push the boundaries, even if your scopes scream at you that your image is out of balance. In the end, the result counts and not necessarily the means by which it was achieved. My name is Gabi Bukataru for Stocksy, and thanks again for watching this episode, where I hope you found something useful in your post-production journey. Please don't forget to leave a like to this video, subscribe if you're not yet, and hit that bell so you'll be notified of future content we're posting on this channel. Till next time!